Hello everybody, Andrew Blake from the digitalaudiomanual.com. Today let's talk about drum maps in Cubase. But before we start, I want to remind you that there's a link below to the Content Navigation Guide, which is an easy-to-navigate web page with links to all the content on this channel. And besides that, in the near future, I'm going to begin adding tips and other bits of information that will only be available there. If you're working with programs like Wavelab or Cubase Plugins or the Cable Guys Shaperbox and many other projects that are in the works, then I know you're going to find, just like I have, that this is an invaluable study aid. And the other thing I want to make sure you understand is that this is not a simple PDF. This is a constantly updated page that has any information that is new, or anytime videos are changed, really anything updated. And once you have it, you will always have the latest information constantly updated. So if you haven't gotten it already, go to the link below, click on it, and save it to your favorites. It's my gift to you. Okay, so let's get started. So if you don't know, drum maps are basically something that allows you to play your drum sounds with different instruments without having your kick drum turn into a cymbal and your snare drum turn into a tom-tom. We're going to go through some examples and you'll see what I mean. But just to get started, you want to be able to find these drum maps, and there's two basic places to look for them. Once you have some kind of track selected with drum sounds, go over to your inspector on the left, and there's an option that stands for the drum map. When you click on that, towards the bottom, you'll see drum map setup, and this will bring up this screen, which we're going to work with. You can also find it if you go up to the MIDI menu, come down to where it says drum map setup. Anytime you open up the drum map setup, if you have any drum maps, they're going to show up here on the left side. The sounds and the settings show up here on the right. I have a few drum maps here, and every time I change one, these sounds and settings change over here on the right. A couple of behaviors that you'll observe. If I put an event on a track, and right now I have no drum map assigned to it, if I double click on that event, I open up in the key editor. But the minute I turn this drum map on, or if I select one of my list, I go back to that same event and open it up, it now opens up in the drum editor. And whatever instruments are assigned over here on the left, those are the same instruments that are assigned here in these settings as they go through any one of these other drums I have in this drum list. As you're looking at these various settings, there's a column over here that says head cymbal. And these are pictures that you can change. When you click on them, you'll get a list of other graphic options. You have another option over here that says use the head pairs. And if you click on that, then you get two of these symbols. You have another option down here that says edit and scores. This one is a deep option. If you have interest in something like this, there's a whole series of videos on Cubase and the score. If you want to choose some kind of different output for your drum map, you can hit this output drop down, pick from any of your other tracks. If you have your drum map assigned to something, you can go over here on the far left and you can audition the different sounds. If you want to create your own map, you can go up to the functions option, hit the option for new map. You can see here it says empty map. Everything on the map is set to some kind of default. You can change the map name if you just double click on it. If you have maps that are close to what you want, but you want to change a few things, you can hit a new copy of it. You can clean up the maps by removing them. You can load and save the maps on your computer. And then just like we did with the head pairs, by clicking on them, you can actually open up a screen that allows you to work on editing these head pairs. So your drum maps can have up to 128 notes, whether you use them or not. And every one of these options can be changed, except for the pitch. But if I take any map and I click on the name, I can type in a different name. I can click on these other fields like the snap and change it. The in note, any of these you click on, you can use a mouse wheel and just spin it to different notes if you want. The out note, channel can be changed. You can pick the output you want to send it to, kind of display note you want. We've already talked about the head symbols, the voices. A very convenient option if you use Groove Agent. When you open up Groove Agent, pick a kit out of the Groove Agent library, load it up, and you have all these great drum sounds. You can then go to your Groove Agent track. Typically, you'll see an option that says create the drum map from the instrument. And at that point, Cubase will create a drum map for you. And I'll draw an event here. And then all the sounds are already mapped for you from that instrument, which you can audition and draw your patterns right in. So let's look at some of the other things we can do with a drum map. I'm going to take a kick sound, load it into a sampler. Let's try a snare drum. Load that into a sampler. Get a hi-hat going. So then we have three sampler tracks with drum sounds. We got a kick, snare, and our hi-hat. And we can start at this point composing from three different tracks. But let's see what the drum map can do for us. I'm going to create a MIDI track. I'm going to go to my drum map setup. I'm going to start with a new map. And I want to use C1 for my kick. So I'm going to locate C1 on the pitch here. I'll give it a name and call it a kick. But here's where the magic happens. I'm going to go over to where it says output, and right now it says track. I click on that, and then in this list, I can pick out whatever I want this note to go to. But right here I have kick, so I'm going to hit that. Now that I put this in, I know I don't want C1, I want C2 for the input and output note. I'm going to locate D2. I'm going to make that into my snare. Come over here and locate the track output. Send that to the snare. Then I'll go to E2. I'll make this my hi-hat. Then I'll go to my track output, change that to hi-hat. I don't like that hi-hat, so I'm going to change the hi-hat sound. Drag a new sample on here. I'm going to change this output note to E3 to raise it up. Same with my kick. I'm going to raise that up an octave. I think I'll raise my snare up too. All this being done in the drum map. I'm going to close my drum map. So now where I have 3 different sample tracks, they can all be controlled from this one MIDI track, and then I can record my drums. I can go into my drum editor if I want to change some things. You have an option in your drum editor up at the top to show only the drum sounds with the events, which will clear everything out except for your actual instruments. And now I have complete control over 3 different tracks, 3 different sample sounds, multiple note reassignments, all done through one track with one drum map. And I can do the same thing using different virtual instruments, combine Groove Agent with other instruments. There is a lot of things you can do with a drum map if you understand it. So let's look a little deeper at the in note and out note concepts. I'm going to go back and pick a kick drum, bring it into my sampler. And when I look down at the sample track, I get the pitch of this kick. If I go to any other key, let's say down to C2, then I get the kick at a lower pitch, or C4 at a higher pitch. But if I want that kick right at its original pitch, I have to hit C3. Now let's put a MIDI track and a drum map in here. Go over to where it says no drum map, go to my drum map setup, go to functions, say new map, call it sample map. The good idea is to name your track when you're doing this kind of stuff. So back on my MIDI track, I'm going to go down to this output drop down. Sure, I'm sending my map to the track I want. And now when I go to the key that says C3, if I hit the audition space right next to it on the left, then I'm going to hear that kick. The same way if I go to the actual sampler track and hit the C3, I'm going to hear that kick. And the most important thing, if I go to my MIDI keyboard and I hit the key C3, I'm going to now hear that kick. First thing you can start remapping is the in note. Maybe you want something different than the C3 when you hit it. If I click on this note and I move it down to C2 instead of C3, now when I go to my MIDI keyboard, although you can't see my hand, I've moved my hand to C2, and now I'm hearing that note. So you can see how things are very different. The pitch is saying C3, the in note is saying C2, which I'm hitting, and what I'm hearing is what the sampler has at C3. So the concept you're trying to understand here is that whatever you said at the in note, that's what you're actually playing on your MIDI controller to trigger the sound. Now the next concept is what happens with the MIDI out note. I know my sampler is at C3, but let me move this note up to C4. If I go back to my keyboard and hit the C3 key, my kick has gotten lower. So what I want to do now is go to the out note and tell it that when I hit the note C2, I want it to send it to C4. So I send that up to C4. Now I hit the kick at C2. It triggers the note sound from C3 and plays it through at C4. Now, because there's a drum map on this track, if I record a MIDI part on the track that has the drum map, then things will continue to play back exactly like I expect, because the map is doing all the work. But what happens if I take this track and move it back on the original track where the sound came from? Because there's no drum map on this track, the sounds are going to play someplace else. Most of the time, if you're using a drum map, you're just going to continue to use it. But if the situation comes up where you need to convert things like that, then you have this other option. If you go up to MIDI, if you come down, there's a thing that says O note conversion. It stands for the output note conversion. If I click on that, it then takes the notes that were in this MIDI track and changes them to what the drum map is. Now if I take this track, it's just a regular MIDI track, but the notes have been corrected. So it'll play on its original track even without a drum map. And that wraps up our discussion of drum maps. As always, if you haven't already, be sure to grab your copy of the Digital Audio Manual Content Navigation Guide from the link below this video. It's the faster, better way to learn and review. Pick it up, look it over, all the different topics that are gathered there, and then you too can get started on your path to a better way to learn all this stuff. Today we talked about drum maps. We looked at the sounds and the settings, the lists of the different drum maps. We got into the functions list. We saw that drum maps can be 128 notes. We looked at importing them from the instrument. We got into the output settings. Then we saw how we can change the in note or the out note depending on what we need. As we continue to learn all the different things about Cubase, as always, it's great to have you guys here, and I'll see you on the next video.